to set up and run War on Want on the Sussex campus. War on Want starts from the premise that poverty is political and does not shy away from tackling the structures that perpetuate poverty wrought by an unjust and inequitable and imbalanced global economy. It was their radical stance and active lobbying primarily that was the catalyst for us deciding to set up the society here. The reason that we've invited Ruth Tanner, campaigns assistant from War on Want, and Chris Sanderson, director of Control Risks, a British private military and security company, was due to the report that we read produced by War on Want called Corporate Mercenaries Making a Killing. What shocked us initially was the UK and US outright dependency on private military and security companies. They are, in fact, the second largest occupying force in Iraq. And it's the paucity of legislation, predominantly UK legislation, that enables these private military and security companies to operate outside of the law. So we're hoping that this debate will obviously raise awareness, make people think about the role of private companies in conflict zones. And we're also hoping that potentially after the talk, people might write to their local MP. You can find their address by going onto a website called theyworkforyou.gov, and just writing to them to ask them to consider pushing forward legislation that means that they don't operate in this void and this vacuum of lawlessness. Ruth Tanner from War on Want giving her perspective on this story. Thanks.
War on Want is a poverty charity, and we have partners overseas. We work with people who really are at the grassroots cutting edge of fighting against global inequality, globalisation, and some of the worst excesses of conflict and human rights abuses. We've been working on this issue, the issue of private military and security companies, or corporate mercenaries and private armies are the other terms we've used to talk about them. We've been working on them as part of a bigger piece of campaigning work and what we've been doing around corporations and conflict. And essentially what that's been has been looking at companies that profit from conflict and war. And along with that, we're looking at companies that are actually, in some situations, fueling the conflicts and war. This is a huge industry now that comprises of hundreds of companies who've operated in more than 50 countries around the world. And they work for governments, for international institutions, but mainly for corporations. The UK really is crucial to this industry because the US and the UK are two of the biggest industries. There is some in France, there's some in other countries. And the British government felt they had to do something about this. And a green paper was published with options for regulation and accountability and control of this industry, of these mercenaries. But nothing's been done since then. And at the same time, you've just seen this ridiculously huge growth. And one of the most alarming aspects of this growth has been as a development of the privatisation of war, of the outsourcing of warfare to companies. And in effect, the way we would say it is that mercenaries have basically been moving from the kind of periphery, the outskirts, the sort of off the agenda, to the corporate boardroom, and have now become part of a kind of mainstream, legitimised part of warfare.
I'm not here to defend the indefensible. There's some good and bad practice out there, and it's clear to all us what that is. War on Want. When I picked up War on Want's brochures and publications about a year ago, I looked through it and thought, well, actually, there's not much I disagree with. Perhaps the use of the word mercenary, but apart from that, most of it I had a lot of agreement with. What I will put forward is that a lot of what we do, and it can be done well, is actually work that needs to be done for a good intention and for good clients. And clients are quite often governments or government-funded reconstruction programs. I don't want or need immunity for my staff. I do want proper regulation and accountability. We don't consider ourselves to be operating in Iraq or Afghanistan or other countries with difficult security situations in order to profiteer from war. We do feel very firmly that we're there to provide security for people who are legitimately trying to go about their business, be that diplomacy or reconstruction or the delivery of aid.
I mean, these companies just shouldn't be in Iraq. These companies have made the situation worse in Iraq, have added to people's sense of what this conflict is for them, have increased the opposition to the occupation, increased the militias have been fighting these companies. And also when you list the devastation, the human rights abuses that are being committed, there is a casualness about them. There is a sense that this is day to day in terms of what's happening. So, there's that idea that this is somehow, that these are clients and these are companies and the market is enabling this to happen. You have to look at what this really is. And this really is the privatisation of war and conflict. And this really is about profiting from that at the expense of human rights and social justice. And I think there's no other way of conceptualising what's happening. Whether they say they're there as armies or they say they're there as peace builders, PMSCs are operating in situations of conflict that are condemning Iraqis, in Iraq particularly, but around the world, but in particular in Iraq, are condemning them to poverty and suffering. And for Iraqis, I think what really has to be understood is the sense that there is no distinguishable difference for them between the private armies and the government's armies. But for Iraqis, they very much see them as treating their country like the Wild West.